Wednesday, the 17th of April, 2024 was World Hemophilia Day, right? And we asked ourselves this morning, as we said, we're going to have our Health Friday conversation around World Hemophilia Day. What is hemophilia? We have invited somebody who is a hemophilia warrior, Isaac Waithaka. He's here with us in the studio. Isaac, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Karibu sana. That's called the hot seat of the situation room. How does it feel?
It's hot.
Ah, no, not yet, boss. Not yet. Tulia. Let's welcome you to the conversation. You are here to educate us about hemophilia. Not many people know what hemophilia is. Not many people can even tell what that means. So you'll tell us. But welcome. City will give you the day's proverb. Every week, City gives us proverbs, 5 proverbs from one African country. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Today is the final day of proverbs from which country?
Cape Verde, Cabo Verde. If the baboon could see his behind, he would also laugh.
You have laughed. Isaac, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
First of all, I think it's interesting. It's funny in itself. But I don't know why, but for me, it just goes straight to thinking about politicians.
That's a good start.
It seems like we see what they do. Particularly, I mean, there are particular ones that we see their behavior, we see what they do, even as presented in the media, but behind the scenes as well. But they don't seem to see it. I think from my perspective,
everybody else
if they saw it, I don't think they'd be doing what they're doing.
Right. You're not wrong when you think about baboons and anything politicians. That's why even the Mzungu said it's a parliament of monkeys.
Maybe that's the context.
Called a parliament of monkeys for a reason. Anyway, what is hemophilia, Isaac?
Right, so first of all, thank you for having me. Hemophilia is a bleeding condition. Right, so it's a bleeding disorder, and in simple terms, it's where a person's blood does not clot as it ought to. So, say in a case where you have, a cut somewhere, and you're bleeding, the blood does not stop bleeding in the time expected for it to stop bleeding, like for anyone else. So, blood doesn't clot, the wound doesn't close on time. Right, so that is in a
nutshell. That's what it is.
That's what it is.
So it's when you start bleeding, you don't stop bleeding.
You don't stop bleeding.
What makes it not do that?
So in the blood, of course, there are different components of the blood. There are those that you learned in biology. There's the white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. But then there are others, and other smaller ones, so smaller sort of proteins. So some of those proteins are called clotting factors. So when you see blood clot somewhere, what happens is that there's a protein that is activated. It's a chain reaction that's activated all the way to that blood clotting. It's one of the most complex processes in the body. And so if you have a deficiency of any one of those clotting factors, maybe you produce just too little or something, or sometimes there's a problem with the genetics that produce those clotting factors, then you have a bleeding disorder.
I see.
Right, okay. Because either the blood doesn't clot in good time, and so it breaks the clot. So, for example, the pressure from the blood will break the clot before it forms. So that's, especially for hemophilia, that's the main cause.
Okay. Yeah. So then, how does that affect you? And this is something that you're born with?
It is, for the most part.
Okay.
I would just say about 70% of people are born with it, and they inherit it from a parent.
Yes, so it's hereditary, okay.
Yeah, it's hereditary, but about 30% of cases, it just happens.
So how do you know what happened to you when you were younger that then they said, okay, there's a problem here? What would happen? You scrape your knee, would not heal? What are we talking about?
So my case in particular, I was lucky to have had an elder brother who had hemophilia. And so all the way from childbirth, when his umbilical cord was cut, there was excess bleeding, to taking care of the child. When he's crawling, you can see bruising on the knees, on the arms. So from the time my parents saw that, and they started taking him to hospital. Now, unfortunately, at the time, not many people knew that. I think in Kenyatta, there was just one doctor who could handle that. He was a hematologist. And so they went through that difficult part. By the time I was born 6 years later, they already knew. Now, they didn't know what exactly this was. Even at the time, they just knew it's a problem. The child is not supposed to play too much, right?
Because he could bleed.
That was as much information as there was, honestly.
Right.
And so by the time I was born, they saw the symptoms, some of them, and they knew this one also has this thing. Yeah.
Where were you born?
Sorry?
Where were you born? Were you born in Nairobi?
Yes, I was born in Nairobi.
So it was lucky because now you had access to KNH.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. There are many others who were not born even at that time near Nairobi. So what would happen if they're taken to a health facility? What would they be told?
Now, even to go statistically, in order to answer that, majority of children born with severe, especially severe hemophilia, don't live past the first 5 years, right? They don't go past 5 years. Now, for those who are in other places in the country, and we visited a number of them, interacted with the community, it's a real problem, because the first place people go to is witchcraft, right? And then that's really the first thing. I love him, but it's true, because I struggle with that even today. You'll meet some people, tell them, I have this condition.
Oh man,
and what they'll say is ini ya damu, ini enda ongeleshe mzazi, and kuna kitu hakutoa somewhere. And so it's very difficult for them to get help. Very difficult. Majority of the medical staff in rural areas have no idea what this is. They had it once in med school when they were studying genetics or something, or blood disorders, something like that. But that's as far as it goes.
So again, what symptoms do you have? And why this is such an important question is because usually if anybody who would then be a caregiver or somebody who would understand the condition,
right,
if we don't see a physical manifestation of something, then it's very difficult for us to even imagine that something is wrong, or that then can we be more sensitive, can we treat better, or even imagine that, okay, if I see this and I'm in the presence of somebody that needs medical attention, then I know this is one or two things that it could possibly be. Then I can help.
Right.
So what are some of the symptoms that you experienced and that we would be able to say, okay, here, something is wrong, we need to go?
Right. So hemophilia and bleeding disorders in general, they have different severities. And so someone like me who has severe hemophilia, as a child, there was mostly easy bruising. If I play too much, you'll see, my skin color, how like a clot forms. So you'll see something like that. Nose bleeding for the most part, and excessive nose bleeding. So when there's nosebleed, just doesn't stop, and people can't seem to do anything about it, even if you go to the doctors. For the different severities, you will find different symptoms. So someone with moderate to mild hemophilia may not present any of those. So some people with mild hemophilia only know about it during surgery, right, on the surgical bed. People with moderate, they'll see some joint problems. So for example, there's swelling in the joints, because there's bleeding into the joints because of the kind of trauma that you get. Just in general, everyday living, there's this sort of trauma that you have. Usually also with severe hemophilia, you'll find bleeding into the muscles. So if someone does any strenuous work, they becomes very painful. There's bleeding into the muscles, and it's very painful. That's one of the ways to know that it might actually be a bleeding disorder.
So those that find out later, those that you're saying like it's mild, so you could live with this thing for years, even tens of years, And you'll only find out in your 30s, 40s, 50s?
Yeah, in case there is a an accident or a traumatic experience, that's for many people. That's the only way they knew that they had hemophilia.
And does it present in the same way? So they'll be on that operating table. They're bleeding. It's not clotting.
Yes.
But I'm sure they've bled throughout their life. So what has been happening previously?
What's been happening is the severity means that the level of clotting factor available in their body has been able to deal with majority of the challenges that people go through, right? Just everyday living. But then during this procedure, because it's where it's almost deliberate cutting through the blood vessels, and the doctors are not aware of any such history, then it becomes a problem with excessive bleeding.
Can one tell?
We can tell, especially with severe to moderate. We can tell when, and doctors today they can tell when there's a bleeding condition.
Right.
Just being able to tell what sort of bleeding disorder it is, that's what needs specialized.
How common is this in Kenya, hemophilia?
So hemophilia in particular is a rare disease. Globally, it's a rare disease, and it is said to affect about 1 in every 10,000 males. So
1 in every 10,000
males, male births. And so our estimate for a population of 50 million people, for example, in Kenya, would be about 5,000 people total with particularly hemophilia. But then there are other bleeding disorders like von Willebrand's disease, there are platelet disorders. You can imagine maybe up to 200,000 people struggling with that. And so hemophilia predominantly affects males.
Why?
And because that's the gene. It's a gene that you inherit from your mother. So let me put it this way. In the same way that there are things you inherit, certain traits from your parents, we inherit our ability to clot, right? So the production of the clotting factor from our mothers, right? So it's X-linked. So it's a trait that comes through the mom, right? So when that
your
happens,
mother is your blood relative, like for real.
like for real. So when that happens, if the mother is a carrier of the hemophilia gene, meaning they have a mutated gene, it's a recessive gene in the with the clotting factors, what happens is now they pass that on to the child, and if it's a boy, it tends to express itself through boys, but girls remain carriers.
So the mother will not know.
The mother will not know. Now, it's a recent development. I would say by recent, in medical terms, it's maybe the past 20 years or so.
That's recent.
Yes. That we've known that carriers of hemophilia also experience mild to moderate hemophilia. So that means that they might be experiencing, for example, particularly in their menstrual period, might be a heavy one without any other causes, without any known causes. And so for most of them, you just hear, just have a heavy flow for ladies. But then when you come to it, you find out sometimes when they give birth to a child, then you know that there's a problem. Sometimes they experience excessive bleeding during childbirth themselves, and there's really no remedy for them. But then when the child has hemophilia, then you know that the mother is a carrier.
Our guest this morning on this Health Friday conversation is Isaac Waidaka. Isaac is a hemophilia warrior. You say you have severe hemophilia.
Yes.
The 17th of April is World Hemophilia Day, and he's here to create awareness on this particular condition. And just say again, what's the condition? How would you describe it?
I would describe hemophilia as a bleeding condition where blood does not clot as it should, and so there's excessive bleeding in case of a cut, nose bleeding, bleeding into joints. That's it really for the most part.
Can it be treated, cured?
Now, at the moment, there is no cure for hemophilia, but there are some developments, and a lot of them. Hemophilia is classified as one of the most expensive conditions to treat and to live with in the world. And so, for example, there are developments in gene therapy, in that sort of direction. But for the most part, what is available to treat hemophilia, the bleeding episodes, particularly, is something called clotting factor. And so clotting factor is something that's injected into the bloodstream. It's really a replacement of the factor that is missing, the missing element that's in the blood that causes clotting. And so that is, for the most part, that's what people use. That's the most effective that we have at the moment.
And
So,
okay.
Go ahead.
How often would you have to have this kind of treatment? I'm thinking of other disorders of the blood, and I think of sickle cell, whereby there have to be constant transfusions, for example. Is that kind of the thing? We're not looking at essentially, because what it is you're removing and putting in new blood, but in this case you're introducing a factor. How often does that have to be done for some, at least comfortability for you?
Right. So the thing with hemophilia is the clotting factor is only used in case of an injury.
Okay.
So in case there's some bleeding happening somewhere, it could be internal or external. That's the only time that you need a clotting factor.
How would you know if there was internal bleeding happening? You feel the pain or something else?
Yes, you'll feel the pain. So for a person with hemophilia, particularly severe hemophilia, you get many more cases. And so you'd be able to tell that, this joint is not moving as it should. And there's usually a lot of pain in it. Or it's, even when it starts bleeding, you can tell there's some heaviness to it. So that and the muscles could be painful and all that. And so when that starts to happen, you'd go ideally to a treatment center, hemophilia treatment center, and they would give you then the shot. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
Just especially according also to the severity of the bleed. Yeah.
And what does the shot do exactly?
So what the shot does is that people were able to manufacture this clotting factor. Sometimes it's taken from human blood, and some is manufactured artificially. So they figured out a way of creating this protein, and so that clotting factor, what it has is that particular protein. It's just a replacement of, to the extent that you don't have or that you produce, it just adds to that and contributes to the clotting process. So it fills in the gap in the clotting process.
And transfusion wouldn't help?
So transfusion helps. With hemophilia, it's just that for example, for mild to moderate hemophilia, unless there's a major event, and I'll give you an example. For the most part, growing up, from childhood, I think I got my first infusion of factor when I was 19. And so the years before would be, what we'd use is cryoprecipitate or fresh plasma or whole blood, if you can get it. It's very difficult to get that sometimes.
If you can get what? Blood?
Yeah, blood, especially for small bleeds. Right? So you'd need to keep going back to the hospital, being admitted, having all that, and that's why factor is the best solution to that. Yeah.
Let me ask this question. Growing up and going to school, what was life like?
That was very difficult. I think to put it that way, I was very lucky. First of all, having an elder brother who had that. Fortunately, he passed away when he was 12 years old. Still from bleeding, just related causes. But then going to school for me, my mother was a teacher in the school I was in. So that helped a lot. And even seeing the challenges people are going through today, I realized there are some of those that I didn't exactly experience. But then you can imagine I would miss majority of school. I think even friends in school used to see me just once in a while. He comes for 2 weeks, and then after that he's back home. And I learned how to study at home, how to, my mom would bring me homework and things like that. And today this is what people studied in your class, so you need to study this. So that's the kind of life that you live. You're rarely in school. If you are, you still have bleeds happening, especially without factor available.
And secondary school?
Secondary school, I was in a boarding school. I still spent majority of my time in the dorm. Though, as you grow up...
Explain why. So yes, you have hemophilia. You're in school.
Yes.
Why is it easier for you to spend time in the dorm and not walking to the classroom?
That's because, for the most part, the limbs are the ones that are affected the most because they're the ones you use. Right? So sometimes I have bleeding in my arms and I can't write. Right? I can't take notes. Internally. And so it just looks like a swelling. Right? Just a swelling anywhere.
What would have caused this in any particular instance? Is it because you've overstrained? Because you wrote to... What is it?
Mostly you've overstrained. But then sometimes you don't know, and in growing up, you wouldn't know what will overstrain you and what won't. And I mean, there are things like, you carried a bucket with water, you will overstrain. So maybe your shoulder will have a bleed or something like that. But then because most people don't understand that, you still have to do those things yourself. Somehow you have to find a way to survive. And so sometimes just everyday things, they can cause that bleed. But for people especially people with severe hemophilia, you can actually have a spontaneous bleed. It means it's a bleed that you don't know the cause of. There's no particular cause for it. And it might happen in the knees. So for me, majority of my bleeds used to be in the knees. And so once in a while, maybe I'll wake up in the morning. Maybe I did something the previous night. And, the bleeding starts slowly, and sometimes you can tell when you're asleep. And you wake up in the morning and it's swollen, and you can't go to class. So that becomes maybe 2-3 days of you're not mobile at all.
Was there understanding from your teachers and consideration as to this condition?
So my mom had explained that to them. But then, it's to a certain extent. Being in a boarding school, there are things you just have to do. I mean,
you got to fetch your water.
Exactly.
You've got to come to the DH, or the meal will be gone.
Right.
Exactly.
What?
Yes.
What I'm wondering, though, as I'm listening to you, so sports out of the question.
Out of the question.
So what did you do instead of sports?
I studied a lot. I read things, my dad had National Geographic magazines from back then.
Yes.
And so I knew things much earlier, as a child, just from reading the magazines and stuff like that. That for the most part, yeah.
Okay, and after secondary school?
And after secondary school, I remember trying to figure out what I could do. And remember at this time, I haven't yet joined a community of people with hemophilia. At the time, I thought I was alone after my brother had passed away. And so I actually, I remember what my mom used to do. She used to give me fare to go to the city center, to town. And just, so what she used to say is just go, look at what people do there and find out. And especially being from in the part of town I grew up in, she didn't want me to stay there so that I don't adopt the behaviors.
Local habits.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to go to town, look around. I met just someone there who used to do graphic design, and I would sit next to them and look at what they're doing. What I'm trying to look at is, do they get hurt doing this? Is this that strenuous? And I'm realizing, I think I could do something with computers. And that's the direction I went in.
Where did you find this guy? Tell us about this guy.
So I found this guy in Kenda House, just next to Afia Center.
Yeah.
And I'd been given some work by someone else said, can you create business cards for me? And I went to look for someone to do that. And so I met someone who was a peer, just this more or less the same age. And he started showing me, this is what I do, this is the software I use, and I got really interested in that. And so I used to go back. So I remember, this was a place for printing. I remember one day I needed some money. So what I did, so they used to pay you extra if you can take, the trolleys.
Yep.
Right? So you can take this trolley from Afia Center there, take it all the way to Koja, and just bring back the trolley, and they'd pay you some amount. And I needed that for fare because I didn't have fare to go home. So I took one
Boss.
full of printouts all the way
To Koja.
all the way to Koja.
From Afia Center.
Yes.
Oh dear.
Knowing full
When I
well,
went back home, I think I stayed for maybe 2 months.
Oh no!
I had
from
bleeding everywhere,
from that one day.
and just that one
Just
day,
one trip.
one trip,
Oh my God.
and I could not tell my parents what I'd just done. Right, so I just stayed there. So what's the problem? I have no idea what I did. Maybe I worked too much, but I knew exactly what I'd done. Right, and so that really cemented for me the idea that I really can't do this. Because your parents tell you can't do manual work, you have to figure out things in a different way. But it doesn't settle in yet until you experience it yourself. I remember later on looking for a job, and I called on some favors, and someone organized an interview for me. And the day before the interview I got a bleed and I couldn't go. And I just realized I can't do this at all. I just need to think about maybe business and my own skills, my own craft, and so that's the experience for majority of the people with hemophilia.
Now, when you joined the community, how did you find out about the community?
So I was sick. I was in hospital in Kenyatta, and someone came. So they heard that there was someone who was unwell there, and they had just received some amount of factor. I'm not sure where they got it from. I think they got it from the society. Someone had come with it. And so they came, told me about hemophilia as I was being discharged, going back home. They told me that there is an event they're holding. So this was Jose Memorial, that there's a fundraising event they're holding. It would be good if I was a part of it. And I was connected to someone else. And when I went there, I found that there are so many people with hemophilia. So, people are showing me around. So I'm told this is a guy with hemophilia, and I can tell because there's this characteristic limp they have. Maybe one of the arms is not fully functional. So I can just tell, oh, this one as well, and that one, and I can tell how this person walks. Does he also have hemophilia? Yes, he does. So that's how I got.
And this is the first time that you actually knew you were not alone.
Yes.
How old were you?
I was at that time I was 21.
It's the first time after the passing of your brother. Your brother passed away when he was 12.
Yes.
And you were 8 years young. You were 6 years younger?
Yes, I was 6 years young.
So you were 6 years old. So between the age of 6 and 21, you had not come across anybody else who has hemophilia.
I
To
had,
the best of your knowledge, you did not know.
Now that I think about it, I had met a few people during my circumcision. And so there were other boys who were also being circumcised. When I was coming into the hospital, they were going out. And so we didn't exactly interact, maybe 2-3 of them. But they didn't look like they had hemophilia, not like the kind I had. But that was about it.
Okay.
You were circumcised
Yes.
with your condition.
Yes.
How did that one work out?
That was a procedure. So with hemophilia, of course, you have to go to hospital, and what they do is they line up fresh frozen plasma for you, and so after you go through the procedure, then you have to be infused that continuously until it heals.
Stabilize.
Yes. So that took maybe about 2 months. So I was in hospital for 2 months.
Hold on a minute. After circumcision, you were in hospital for 2 months?
Yes,
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
to basically make sure that you were going to be okay leaving.
exactly, yes.
Okay. So what is everyday life like? And I ask this because here you are in Nairobi, right? You have
Yes.
parents who knew what was happening and for the better part had access to
Right.
information
Right.
and had access to medical service, medical facilities, you know that.
Exactly.
But I dare to think that there are lots of people who have this condition and have either no idea that they have it, that they're just suffering something along the way,
Right.
or are not able to afford to treat it when they can. What would that be like for them? And I mean, what really is the lifespan of somebody who would not then have access to treatment?
So it's a good question. So when I was growing up, I got wind of some statistic that the life expectancy for a person with severe hemophilia in a country like Kenya was, at the time it was about 18 years. Then later on, when I got to 18, I went to look at it again.
You're okay.
Right,
Yeah.
and I found out that it was about 30 years old. And so I remember I planned my life for 30 years.
Wow.
I was like, okay, so at 30, so by 30, this is what I need to have done, all this. Now, for people in especially rural areas, they struggle with a special, there's another layer to it.
Yeah.
And the layer is stigma.
Sure.
And that makes it even more difficult. So you can imagine for majority of the parents, so the parents, it starts with especially the mothers, even those who have access to a hospital today, and they go there, and usually the doctor will say something to the tune of, this might be a bleeding condition, it comes through the mother.
Bas.
And from the moment they say that,
Over.
the husbands, the fathers separate themselves. We've had cases where, the family, the man's family decides, you can no longer marry this woman, she has this problem, so we'll find someone else for you.
Atatuharibia watoto.
Exactly. And so from that time they are alone, and it's something that we've been studying. It's a cycle of poverty. So from that time the mothers are alone. In the society, the moment a child has a problem and it's a bleeding issue, then there's a lot of ostracization, even from their own families. So there's a particular case we had in Turkana, that was the mother had gotten, she had the child with hemophilia, and the traditional practice in their culture was bloodletting.
Like what you do with cattle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is it's a dire situation. So she had to protect the child, and because of protecting the child, according to their customs, if you're preventing your own child from being healed, you're a
witch.
You're a witch, right? Because it means you are the one who wants to cause it. And so she struggled a lot. And it took a process of resettling her and such things. Access to hospital is so difficult in that side, right? So just access to a hospital, and then access to a hospital with a person, with a medical professional who knows about hemophilia and how to handle it, just another layer. So it's very difficult.
How many are you in the society?
So in the society, so in the community, right? So in the community, we have a count of about 1,000 people, give or take, and about 1,000 people who are registered, who are diagnosed with hemophilia, just around there. Yeah, there's a community.
Different ages.
Different ages.
Oldest, youngest.
The youngest I think we've seen so far is a few months old. The child was born just last year. The oldest that I am aware of is someone who is 60-something now. I think they had mild or moderate hemophilia, And that's the oldest person that I am aware of. Yeah.
Do you have other siblings?
I do have other siblings. They don't have hemophilia.
Are they boys?
Yeah, 2 guys and 1 lady.
Okay. Do you imagine? I mean, you said you had a plan until you were 30. But I mean, it's a really heavy thought to have, isn't it?
It is.
That you, in your head, you're thinking that, okay, well, one day it will be lights out, kind of thing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Does that play heavily on your mind, or are you able to say, look, it's today, let's get through today and then get to the next day? How do you handle that? Because it's a real thing, and maybe there are other folks who are also in the same boat who need to understand, okay, so how do I navigate this? It must be really heavy on your head.
It is, and I see this especially for guys with hemophilia in their teens, and just later on, dealing with issues with relationships, with work. As men, there's this question about your masculinity, which primarily comes from your ability to do things, especially in our culture.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of challenge, but then this thought that you could die at any time, in case of an accident, and I mean, it's very difficult to balance, to constantly think about that. Now, I've gone through different experiences where I've been hospitalized, and I even have a story somewhere about an out-of-body experience that I came to learn later that's what it was. Right, so you have bleeding into your internal organs, and sometimes the body can't handle that. It's too much. The treatment, for example, in hospitals, is not done fast enough. At a time when there are 1 or treatment centers. So through things like that, I think I would say it's constantly an existential crisis, and it's very hard for other people to relate with that. But there's a different struggle. So, for example, for those of us who grew up without factor, around our ages, I remember experiencing the challenges with my knees, with arthritis, at around 12 years. But I thought...
You had arthritis at 12?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Undiagnosed, but it's known that when you have bleeding
swelling
into
of the joints, and
the joints,
bleeding,
so there's joint damage, a lot of it. So from 12, I've always had pain in my knees, walking, going upstairs, going downward, and all that, sitting for too long, standing for too long. There are those challenges. And interestingly enough, I think maybe because of how I was raised, I thought everyone else experienced that. I remember someone asking me, "What is it like living with hemophilia?" And I didn't quite understand. What do you mean? And it's like, no, don't you have the pain in your knees? And I realized other people don't have pain in your knees and aches in your in your body when you're going to sleep and things like that. I think that just opened my eyes to. I think this is different.
You said it's very expensive to live with hemophilia.
It is.
What does it cost you a month?
Luckily, it doesn't cost me much, and that is because there are these organizations that have, found a way to get donations for their factor. If I were to buy factor for myself, so the factor is measured in international units. So for a person of my body weight with an average bleed, say mild to moderate bleed, I would need about 6,000 total units. Because of age, maybe because of resilience, I'd need maybe about 4,000 or so. But for just complete, dealing with the bleed completely would be about 6,000 IUs. So for the market rate for factor is anywhere between 40 US cents to $1 per unit. So if we can calculate at the highest at $1 per unit, that would mean I need about $6,000 every bleed. And at $6,000 for a person with severe hemophilia, right now I have maybe around, and I'm very careful in how I'm living my life. Exactly. Maybe 3 a month.
$18,000 a month.
Exactly. Yes. So that's how much you'd need to just live with hemophilia.
Wow. Hey, you'll come again. We need to create more and more awareness about this. I mean, there's a lot here that we're talking about. There's a lot to unpack in coming days. But Isaac, thank you very much for joining us. Isaac Waidaka is a hemophilia warrior. He has taught us very many things about hemophilia today. We still have a lot to learn about this condition. It's 10 a.m. Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.